Blood froze on his blade before it hit the ground. King Gareth rode home early from war, desperate to see his pregnant queen. But the castle was silent. Empty. Wrong. Then an Omega maid he barely knew slammed him against the wall, covered his mouth, and whispered 2 words that shattered everything: stay silent. Because waiting inside wasn't his wife. It was something wearing his face. If this story hit you, drop a comment. And if you want more stories that dig deep, hit subscribe. You won't regret it. Blood dripped from his broadsword, freezing before it touched the cobblestones. King Gareth had come home from the slaughter, craving nothing more than his wife's warmth. Arriving 2 weeks ahead of schedule to find his castle unnaturally quiet. Then a terrified Omega maid slammed him against the shadowed wall and pressed her hand over his mouth. Stay silent. The northern wind howled through the iron gates of Winterbourne Keep as Alpha King Gareth of the Blackwood Pack rode into the courtyard. He'd been riding for 3 days and 3 nights without rest, leaving his vanguard far behind in the snowy valleys of the Crimson Marches. The border wars had been vicious, a grinding campaign of blood and frozen mud. But Gareth had crushed the rebellion 2 weeks earlier than his war council predicted. He was the Iron Wolf, a conqueror whose name made rival alphas across the continent flinch. And yet, as he swung down from his horse in the empty courtyard, all that ferocity drained away, replaced by a raw, desperate ache. He wanted his mate, Queen Rowena of the Vane lineage. His beautiful pregnant Luna, who carried the future of the Blackwood bloodline inside her. The courtyard felt wrong. This time of evening, the grounds should have been alive with stable hands, guardsmen, the ringing clang of blacksmiths repairing armor. Tonight there was only stillness, broken by the wind slicing through the parapets. Gareth tried to ignore the unease gnawing at his wolf's instincts, telling himself it was just the deep midwinter freeze driving everyone indoors. He wanted to surprise his queen, so he bypassed the grand oak doors of the Great Hall and slipped into the shadows of the eastern wing instead. Heading for a hidden postern door thick with ivy, these were the servant corridors, narrow winding passageways built into the fortress walls. They let the maids and squires move unseen, tending the castle fires and tapestries without disturbing the nobility. For Gareth, it was the fastest and most discreet route straight to the royal bedchamber. The air inside smelled of old ash, damp stone, and dreed lavender. He moved with the silent predatory grace natural to an alpha, his heavy leather boots making no sound on the dirt-packed floors. He unclasped his fur cloak, the chainmail beneath clinking faintly, his golden eyes adjusted to the pitch-black corridors, his heightened wolf senses mapping the labyrinth. He expected to catch the comforting scent of Rowena, jasmine, and warm honey. Instead, as he rounded a blind corner near the upper gallery, a different scent hit him: crushed pine, wildflowers, and absolute paralyzing terror. Before his instincts could even register the threat, a small figure lunged from a darkened alcove. Small hands, surprisingly strong and driven by pure desperation, shoved hard against his chest armor. Gareth, a mountain of muscle and battle-hardened reflexes, barely stumbled back, but the sheer boldness of the attack left him stunned for a heartbeat. He grabbed his attacker by the throat, claws extending, a deep rumbling growl building in his chest. He slammed the figure against the icy stone wall, ready to snap their neck. "My king, please," a voice gasped. Gareth froze. Torchlight from a distant grate flickered over the face of his attacker. It was an Omega, a lowly castle maid, dressed in the rough gray wool of the scullery servants. Her apron was covered in soot, her pale skin bruised, and her wide forest green eyes were wide with horror. He recognized her faintly. Maria, one of the invisible hands that tended the hearths in the royal wing. "You dare touch your alpha," Gareth hissed, his voice low and dangerous, his grip tightening. "I should rip your throat out for this." Maria didn't cower, though her entire body trembled like a leaf in a storm. Instead, She did the unthinkable. She reached up, her soot-stained fingers shaking, and clamped her hand firmly over the Alpha King's mouth. Gareth's eyes widened in outrage. His wolf roared internally, demanding submission. He grabbed her wrist to break it, but Maria's eyes locked onto his, brimming with tears and a frantic, silent plea. "Stay silent." She breathed, barely louder than the air itself. Gareth's anger faltered, replaced by a cold spike of adrenaline. Omegas were naturally submissive. For Maria to assault him, to cover his mouth and demand his silence, required a terror so profound it overrode every biological instinct she had. He released her throat, though he kept her pinned. Glaring at her sharply to make her explain, Maria slowly lowered her hand from his mouth. Swallowing hard. "You weren't supposed to return for another 2 weeks," she whispered, her chest heaving. "The gods must have guided your horse. You can't go to the royal chambers. You can't let anyone know you're here. Speak plainly." "Omega," Gareth growled, keeping his voice barely audible. "Why is my keep empty of guards? Where is my queen?" Maria squeezed her eyes shut, a tear carving a clean line through the soot on her cheek. "The queen is in the great hall, my king. But the keep is empty because Beta Cassian dismissed the royal guard to the lower village for a feast. They're celebrating your victory. But it's a trap. They're preparing the keep for a funeral." Gareth's heart pounded against his ribs. "Whose funeral?" Maria looked up at him, her gaze filled with a sorrow so deep it made Gareth's blood run cold. "Yours, my king." A heavy, suffocating silence stretched between them in the dark corridor. Gareth stared at the frail maid, his mind struggling to process the treason she was suggesting. Cassian, his beta, his blood brother, who had fought back-to-back with him in 100 skirmishes. Rowena, the woman carrying his pup. "You lie," Gareth snarled, stepping closer, his imposing frame casting a monstrous shadow over her. "You speak treason against your Luna and your beta. Give me one reason why I shouldn't throw you from the highest parapet for this slander." "Because I know the truth about what's in her womb," Maria fired back, her voice shaking but her posture defiant. "And I know what they brought into this castle 3 nights ago. Please, King Gareth, I have nothing to gain by lying to you. My life is forfeit either way. If they find me talking to you, Cassian will flay me alive. Just come with me. Let your own eyes be the judge." The desperate sincerity in her scent, pure, unadulterated fear mixed with tragic honesty, calmed his raging wolf. Omegas couldn't mask their scent. If she were lying, he'd smell the deception, that bitter tang of deceit. But there was only the sharp aroma of pine and a profound, heartbreaking loyalty. Gareth gave a curt nod. "Lead." Maria exhaled a shaky breath and turned, moving deeper into the narrow, claustrophobic tunnels. Gareth followed, turning his broad shoulders sideways to fit through the tighter spaces. As they moved, Maria whispered the horrors that had unfolded during his absence. "The queen never loved you. My king, her family, the Vanes, lost their power when you conquered the southern territories. Her marriage to you was a treaty. To her, it was a death sentence. She and Cassian have been lovers since before you claimed her." Gareth's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ground together. The betrayal stung, a sharp, venomous bite to his pride and his heart. "Cassian's child," Maria whispered, looking back at him with pity. But they knew a beta's child could never inherit the Blackwood throne while an Alpha King lived. So they devised a plan. "When you left for the Crimson Marches, Rowena sought out the flesh-weavers of the Boglands." Gareth stumbled, his boot scraping against the stone. Flesh-weavers. Dark magic. Magic banned across the entire werewolf kingdom. Witches who dealt in blood magic, manipulating life and death. Shaping flesh like clay, they brought a creature back. Maria continued, her voice trembling violently. They stopped before a small iron grate embedded in the stone, overlooking the great hall below. "Look for yourself. But don't make a sound. Gareth, don't let your wolf roar. The floors of the great hall are lined with wolfsbane powder. If you step out there in a rage, the guards loyal to Cassian will shoot you down with silver-tipped crossbows." Gareth knelt beside the grate, his golden eyes peering through the iron slats. The great hall was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of the massive hearth. The grand oak dining table had been pushed aside. In the center of the room stood Rowena. She looked breathtaking in a gown of deep emerald velvet, her blonde hair cascading down her back. Beside her stood Cassian, dressed in his full beta armor, his arm wrapped intimately around her waist. Gareth's wolf clawed at his mind, screaming for blood. He wanted to smash through the wall and tear his beta's throat out with his bare teeth. He wanted to drag his treacherous mate by her hair. But then the grand oak doors of the great hall swung open. A figure stepped into the light. Gareth stopped breathing. The blood in his veins turned to ice, leaving him frozen in an abyss of horror and disbelief. Walking into the room, wearing Gareth's own royal regalia, his heavy fur cloak, the ancestral blackwood sword strapped to his hip, was himself. The creature possessed Gareth's broad shoulders, his dark, unruly hair, his jagged scar across his left cheek. It moved with the exact same dominant swagger, its golden eyes radiating the same alpha authority. It was a perfect, flawless mirror image, a skinwalker. Maria whispered in his ear, her breath warm against the freezing sweat breaking out on his neck. A dark entity molded by the flesh weavers. It mimics its prey flawlessly. To the pack. "It is you down there." The skinwalker walked up to Rowena and smiled. A terrifying, soulless imitation of Gareth's own smile. Rowena reached up and kissed the creature passionately, running her hands through its dark hair. "Is the impostor dead?" the false Gareth asked, its voice an exact replica of the king's deep, gravelly baritone. Cassian bowed his head. "Our scouts report the king's vanguard was ambushed in the valley. We poisoned his armor before he left. The venom will have reached his heart by now. When the vanguard returns with his body, we'll declare that a shapeshifter from the Crimson Pack tried to infiltrate our ranks and was killed. You, my king," Cassian smiled at the skinwalker, "will tragically mourn the death of the impostor who dared wear your face, solidifying your reign." Rowena laughed, a cruel silvery sound that made Gareth sick to his stomach. "And then, my love," she touched her swollen belly, looking at Cassian, "the true alpha heir will be born, and the Blackwood legacy will be wiped from the earth, replaced by the Vane bloodline." In the walls, the real King Gareth looked down at his own hands. In the dim light, he saw it. The faint, dark necrotic veins spiderwebbing up his wrists from where his leather gauntlets rubbed against his skin. The slow-acting poison. He was already dying, and his kingdom had already been stolen without a single sword being drawn. He turned his head slowly to look at the trembling Omega beside him. Maria reached into her apron and pulled out a small glass vial filled with a glowing silver liquid. "I stole the tears of the moonflower from the royal apothecary," Maria whispered fiercely, pressing the vial into his massive poisoned hand. "It will stall the venom, but it won't cure it. My king, we've lost the throne room, but we haven't lost the war. If you want to take your pack back, you have to die tonight." Without hesitation, Gareth unstoppered the glass vial and downed the glowing silver liquid. The reaction was instantaneous and agonizing. It felt like he'd swallowed liquid fire. The tears of the moonflower violently clashing with the bog venom already corroding his veins. He fell to his knees in the cramped passageway, biting down hard on his leather gauntlet to stifle the feral roar tearing at his throat. Black bile rushed to his lips, but he forced himself to breathe through the searing pain. Maria dropped to her knees beside him, her small hands pressing firmly against his broad, trembling shoulders. "Breathe. My king, the silver is burning away the rot, but it will leave you weak. You can't shift into your wolf form. If you do, your accelerated heart rate will pump the remaining venom straight to your brain. Gareth gasped, his forehead resting against the freezing stone wall. The necrotic veins on his wrists had stopped their terrifying march upward, stalling into a sickly bruised purple. He'd survived, but he was a ghost in his own castle. Where do we go? Gareth rasped, his voice a broken shadow of its former commanding boom. The entire keep will be crawling with Cassian's loyalists by morning. If I'm dead to the world, I need a grave. I've already prepared one, Maria said, pulling him up by his uninjured arm. Her strength was astonishing for an Omega, fueled by a terrifying resolve. Below the dungeons, the ancestral crypts. Cassian ordered them sealed months ago because Rowena claimed the stagnant air made her ill. No one goes down there. Not even the rats. They moved like phantoms through the suffocating darkness of the servant tunnels. Descending deeper into the bowels of Winterborn Keep, the air grew frigid, heavy with the scent of ancient dust and decaying limestone. When they finally pushed through a rusted iron grate, they emerged into the sprawling cavernous crypts where generations of Blackwood alphas lay in eternal slumber. It was a labyrinth of stone tombs and crumbling statues. Completely cut off from the world above, Maria guided him to a small hidden alcove behind the massive sarcophagus of his great-grandfather. She'd hoarded supplies here: a bedroll of stone wool blankets, dried venison, canteens of fresh water, and a makeshift apothecary station filled with dried herbs and stolen bandages. Gareth collapsed onto the bedroll, his massive frame shivering as the fever of the poison took hold. He watched through half-lidded eyes as the soot-stained maid immediately set to work, lighting a single heavily shielded candle and grinding a paste of charcoal and snow lily to draw out the toxins from his skin. Why? Gareth finally asked, his golden eyes locking onto her forest green ones. You're an Omega, a scullery maid. If Cassian catches you, your death will be unspeakable. Why risk everything for a king who didn't even know your name? Maria paused, her hands trembling slightly as she applied the cold paste to the blackening veins on his wrists. She refused to look at him, staring intently at her work. My name is Maria Croft, she said quietly. Gareth's breath hitched. Croft. Harrison Croft was my chief apothecary. A brillant man. Cassian executed him for embezzling royal funds while I was negotiating the Southern treaties last spring. My father didn't embezzle a single copper, Maria replied, a fierce, bitter edge cutting through her soft voice. He was executed because he performed the Queen's first trimester examination. He discovered that the scent of the child she carried was entirely wrong. It lacked the alpha spark of the Blackwood line. It smelled of a beta. He confronted Cassian, demanding he tell you the truth. They slit his throat that very night and tossed his body into the river. Gareth closed his eyes, a profound, crushing guilt settling over his chest. He'd been blind, consumed by the border wars and the expansion of his territory. He'd left his home in the hands of vipers. I was his apprentice, Maria continued, wrapping his arm in clean linen. When the guards came for him, he shoved me into the laundry chute. I burned my own hair with lye, covered myself in soot, and stopped bathing to mask my scent. I became a ghost in the scullery. I watched them plot. I watched Rowena bring the fleshweavers in through the servant gates. I waited for you to return, hoping I could warn you before it was too late. Gareth reached out, his large calloused hand gently grasping her small, scarred one. The touch sent an unexpected electric jolt straight to his core. His wolf, usually dominant and aggressive, suddenly whined softly in the back of his mind. It wasn't a demand for submission. It was a profound, overwhelming urge to protect. Rowena had been a political arrangement, an alliance forged in ink and territory. She'd never been his fated mate. But here, in the damp, freezing dark of a tomb, looking at an Omega who had sacrificed everything for the truth, Gareth felt the undeniable soul-deep click of a true mating bond. "You're no ghost." "Maria Croft," Gareth vowed, his voice gaining a fraction of its old steel. "You're the only living soul in this kingdom. With any honor, I will take back my throne. And when I do, Cassian and the Vain Witch will drown in their own blood. But I need an army. I need Commander Gilbert." Gilbert was the commander of the Western Garrison, a fiercely loyal alpha who despised Cassian. If anyone could rally a counter-siege without alerting the imposters, it was him. Maria nodded, her green eyes blazing with determination in the candlelight. "I know the drainage pipes that lead out to the Western River. I'll bring him your signet ring. But you must stay here. My king, you must stay dead until the wolf moon." 2 weeks passed in agonizing slow motion. Above ground, the kingdom mourned the tragic death of the shapeshifter who dared mimic their king while celebrating the miraculous survival of the true Alpha. The keep was draped in black and gold banners, preparing for the grand winter solstice feast under the full wolf moon. A night when the king would officially name his unborn heir. Below ground, Gareth healed. The moonflower tears and Maria's relentless care purged the bog venom from his system. He trained in the shadows of the crypts, using rusted ancestral broadswords to rebuild his atrophied muscles. His bond with Maria deepened with every passing hour. They spoke of the future, of rebuilding the pack, not on fear and conquest, but on loyalty and truth. She became his anchor, her scent of pine and wildflowers, the only thing keeping him from giving in to mindless feral rage. On the night of the solstice, the great hall was a spectacle of roaring fires, roasted meats, and overflowing chalices of mead. Seated on the carved obsidian throne was the skinwalker, wearing Gareth's crown, its golden eyes scanning the room with hollow authority. Beside it sat Rowena, radiant in crimson silk, a heavy diamond pendant resting against her collarbone. Cassian stood at her right hand, practically glowing with smug victory. The heavy oak doors of the great hall suddenly groaned open. Silencing the minstrels and the drunken laughter, Commander Gilbert strode into the hall, clad in his heavy battle armor, his hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword. Behind him marched a dozen of his elite Iron Guard, their faces grim and unreadable. The skinwalker stood up, playing the part of the benevolent ruler flawlessly. "Commander Gilbert, we didn't expect the Western Garrison to join the solstice feast. You leave our borders unguarded. I come bearing a tribute." "My king," Gilbert said, his voice echoing loudly against the vaulted ceilings. A relic from the ancestral crypts. The ranks of the Iron Guard parted. The entire hall collectively gasped. The sound sucking the oxygen from the room, Gareth stepped forward. He didn't wear the fine silks or polished plate armor of a reigning monarch. He wore the rusted ancient chainmail of his forefathers. His face pale, his dark hair grown wild and unkempt, but his golden eyes burned with an inferno of pure, unfiltered alpha dominance. Beside him stood Maria, her head held high. Clutching the Blackwood signet ring, Rowena screamed, stumbling backward and knocking over a heavy silver chalice. Cassian drew his sword, his face draining of all color. "Treason!" Cassian roared, his voice cracking with panic. "Guards, the shapeshifter has returned. Kill the impostor." The castle guards hesitated, looking between the two identical kings. The scent in the room was a chaotic storm of confusion. The skinwalker narrowed its eyes. Stepping down from the dais, "You're a persistent parasite." It spoke, perfectly mimicking Gareth's gravelly tone. "I killed you in the valley. You killed a decoy." Gareth lied smoothly, stepping forward to meet his impostor in the center of the hall. "But you made one fatal flaw." "Cassian, fleshweavers can perfectly mold bone and skin. They can steal memories and mimic a voice, but they can't forge the blood of a true alpha." Without warning, Gareth drew the rusted ancestral blade from his hip and slashed it across his own palm. Bright crimson blood welled up, dripping onto the pristine marble floor. The scent of genuine, undeniable Blackwood alpha blood hit the air. A heavy metallic aroma of ozone and dark forest that immediately forced the weaker wolves in the room to bare their necks in submission. Gareth pointed his bleeding hand at the skinwalker. "If you are the king, bleed for your pack." The impostor froze. Cassian lunged forward. "Don't listen to this trickery, slay him." But the skinwalker realized the charade was over. Its jaw unhinged in a grotesque, unnatural manner, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. And it let out a deafening, unnatural shriek that sounded like tearing metal. It lunged at Gareth, its fingernails elongating into jagged, bone-white claws. The Great Hall erupted into chaos. Gilbert and the Iron Guard clashed with Cassian and his loyalists, the sound of ringing steel and snarling wolves echoing off the stone walls. Gareth met the beast's charge head-on. The skinwalker possessed his strength, but it lacked his soul. It fought with mindless savagery, slashing at Gareth's rusted armor. Gareth parried a brutal swipe, stepping inside the creature's guard, and drove his elbow into the thing's throat. Feeling the unnatural, spongy texture of its flesh, the creature hissed, sinking its claws into Gareth's shoulder. Pain flared, but the Alpha King barely flinched. He channeled every ounce of his rage, his betrayal, and his love for the Omega watching from the sidelines. With a guttural roar, Gareth twisted his blade upward and drove the heavy iron sword straight through the skinwalker's chest, pinning it to the heavy oak dining table. The creature thrashed wildly. Instead of red blood, thick, foul-smelling black ichor poured from the wound, sizzling as it hit the marble floor. The dark magic holding it together began to unravel. Its flesh melted, shifting through dozens of grotesque faces before finally dissolving into a pile of foul-smelling ash and ruined clothing. Silence slammed back into the room. Cassian, seeing the beast destroyed, dropped his sword and fell to his knees, surrounded by Gilbert's men. On the dais, Rowena was clutching her stomach, screaming in agony. The dark magic she'd purchased with her own life force was recoiling. The Fleshweaver's pact was broken, and the dark energy was rapidly draining her vitality. She aged a decade in a matter of seconds, her golden hair turning brittle and white. Gareth walked slowly toward the throne, his boots crunching on the ashes of his impostor. He looked down at his treacherous beta and his deceitful queen. There was no pity in his heart, only the cold, unyielding justice of the North. "Take Cassian to the dungeons," Gareth commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "He will face the executioner at dawn for the murder of Harrison Croft and high treason. As for the vain woman, strip her of her titles, banish her to the Boglands, let her live out her days with the witches she loves so much." As the guards dragged them away, the remaining pack members immediately dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to their true alpha. Gareth didn't sit on the obsidian throne. Instead, he turned and walked back through the kneeling crowd until he stood before Maria. The small Omega looked up at him, her eyes wide, entirely out of place among the velvet and gold of the nobility. Gareth dropped to one knee before her, ignoring the gasps of his court. He took her soot-stained hand, pressing it gently to his forehead. "You told me to stay silent, Maria," Gareth said softly, "for her ears alone. But from this day until my voice, my sword, and my heart belong only to you." Winter passed, taking the cold ashes of treason with it. Gareth rebuilt his fractured court, not with a Vayne, but with Maria, his true queen. The Omega who once scrubbed hearths now sat upon the throne, her crown earned in the shadows. Their reign was forged not in the blood of conquest, but in the quiet, unbreakable courage of a girl who dared to whisper in the dark, "Stay silent. I study betrayal, loyalty, and power in stories that reveal what people do when everything's on the line." This channel breaks down the moments that define who we really are. 5. Takeaway points. Point 1. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones planning your funeral. Gareth's beta Cassian fought beside him in 100 battles. But the moment Gareth left for war, Cassian poisoned his armor and replaced him with a skinwalker. Loyalty isn't proven in good times. It's proven when no one's watching. Point 2. The smallest voices often carry the most dangerous truths. Maria was a scullery maid, invisible to everyone in the castle, but she was the only one who saw the fleshweavers arrive. The only one who dared to shove a king against a wall and tell him his queen was a traitor. Power listens to rank. Survival listens to truth. Point 3. Real love isn't built on treaties or crowns. Gareth married Rowena for politics, and she kissed a monster wearing his face while planning his death. But Maria risked everything to save him, hiding him in crypts and nursing poison from his veins. She had no title, no power, nothing to gain. And that's exactly what made her real. Point 4. When someone attacks your honor, stay calm and prove them wrong with something they can't fake. Cassian screamed treason and called Gareth an impostor. Gareth didn't argue. He slashed his own palm and let his alpha blood hit the floor. The scent forced every wolf in that hall to their knees. Words can lie. Blood doesn't. Point 5. The throne means nothing if you build it on lies. Gareth didn't reclaim his crown by sitting on it. He knelt before Maria, the Omega who saved him, and gave her his voice, his sword, and his heart. She earned her place in the shadows while others stole theirs in the light. That's the difference between a ruler and a king.